Good morning, everybody. This is James Fee from cold but sunny Phoenix, Arizona. And I say cold, it's probably 73 degrees outside, but I have to wear socks. So it's the things we must do to live where we live. The other thing is, I had thought about this. I was telling Paul and Madeline before we went live that I had no Giants news to talk about, but the Yomiuri Giants from Tokyo, Japan, won the Japan series. So another Giants baseball team is winning another baseball title. So that's just the way this is. The Giants just keep winning. I'm not a big New York Giants fan for for football, but I wouldn't bet against them. How you doing, Madeline?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Portland. Not, it's cold by your standards, but lovely.
Right? It's always lovely in Portland. You
Every
know?
time you show up.
Oh, and speaking of which, look who joined us. My boss, CEO, co-founder of WeoGeo, Paul Bissett. How you doing, Paul?
Doing good. Doing
Good.
good.
Plenty of time to just take a midday Wednesday off and sit and talk about whatever we talk about.
It makes a nice break to the day.
Does it?
Yeah,
Plus, you got your cool Apple earbuds in, and
I got my Apple earbuds, and I was happy to see the guys like last week wearing. I was like, oh, I could do that. I don't have to wear the headset.
oh, these headsets are awesome. I look like I'm on my Xbox and I'm fragging Nazis or whatever the kids do these days. You know? Actually, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting old. Last night, I coached my son's baseball team, and it was late at night, and I guess they all had sugar because of Halloween, and I said, "This is not a romper room," and they all looked at me like I did. What the hell's a romper room? And so I felt really old because I had to explain what a romper room is.
Yeah,
Madeline's
I have
shaking
no
her head
idea what
because she
that
has
is
no idea.
either.
But
But I
Paul,
don't know what
you know what a
fracking
romper room is,
zombies
right,
is
Paul?
either, so.
It's
I
like
know what romper room is.
yeah, it's
Yes,
like an
I'm old
active.
enough. I'm old enough to actually have watched it. I think.
I think you guys call them media rooms now, or game rooms, is they probably in the
Well,
'90s.
there was a show
There
called
was a show, yeah, that
Romper Room.
show. It was out of like Philadelphia or somewhere, but it
Yeah.
was just a place where kids went crazy, and they were going crazy. And then I said that the kind of things that your dad used to say when you were younger, and you just looked up, and I'm like, dude, who's this old man?
I,
Oh
I
well.
I coach soccer with youngsters, second graders, and my solution to that is just take a lap. And the funny thing is I'll get one of them, they're all messing around, and I'll say, yes, just go, take a lap. And they'll all look at me and say, can we go? Can we go? Can we go? It's like, fine, everybody, run.
Yeah,
Just go.
right. Kids. Oh well. So yeah, that was our last regular season game. So now it's a single elimination tournament. Win or go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, time to go. So this week, as I said, I got Paul, my boss. So we were
You
kind of
gotta be
joking
nice to
around.
me.
Yeah, I was joking around.
I'll
This could
pick
be
on
my
me.
last show. Could be Hangouts with Madeline Steele next week.
uh,
So I've been working with Paul for, I want to say, almost 5 years now, isn't it? Close to it, 4 years at least. So
Yeah.
I sort of forget where WeoGeo started, not because, well, one, I wasn't there, and two, because I'm so used to talking about it. So for those, and for Madeline, why don't you go kind of in the history about how the hell you ended up where you are?
How the hell? Okay, so I was working for the Navy and chased my wife to Florida. Started a nonprofit research institute to actually make predictions on water column and coastal resources, and got involved with not just the prediction but also the mapping. And was joined by a bunch of people. One of them, the co-founder here, Dave Kohler. And the Navy started giving us sensors to build maps that we would use to initialize these models, as well as to help them find stuff, do materials classification, where do you run, where do you land, that sort of stuff in the water. And we were building really high-end sensors that even today, I think the standards of which still exceed what's available out there in the market. But one of the things that we found is that the maps that we could produce out of the sensors, while good, were always better if we could get other data. And so over the years, building those maps and flying in airplanes and traveling all over the world and blowing up breakers in hotel rooms because we're spinning 8 computers trying to process aircraft data to turn it around in less than 24 hours. the biggest problem with producing the maps really was about getting other data streams that would make the map more robust, better for the user to use and make decisions on. And the customer at that time, actually, when they made decisions, they were betting lives on those decisions. So it was significant. So one of the things that happened about the time that we were running into those problems is that Google Earth launched, and suddenly geography became cool again. If it ever was cool, but it became cool. It was an interesting time, and we saw a lot of events coming together. Not the least of which, we were getting so advanced in some of the instrument side that to take it to the next level, we were going to have to go become defense contractors for real. So we kind of all stood around and said, well, what do we want to do? And one of the technologies that we had developed to get this information out to customers quickly was this massively parallelized processing system that indexed and searched the mapping products that we're making, and then allowed users to cut the piece out and send it to the device in the field. And as we looked at some of the problems, even in Google Earth at the time, that the search and indexing and finding of data was actually hard all across the board. And a lot of the data that we needed actually didn't exist anywhere that a search engine could get to it. It was behind a firewall somewhere. It was sitting on somebody's disk drive. And so as we began to noodle on the problem, well, how do we bring information that's unlit or dark and bring it up to the light so that more people can use it, and in the process of using it, create better information streams and really satisfy the mission we were all kind of interested in, which was, how do you change the world, or at least take care of the world you have. We kind of iterated back and forth on what could we do as a small group that could take a slice of that and make it better. And we settled on coming up with an indexing system, a search and discovery system. And on top of that, what we figured is we needed a way to incentivize people out there who had the content on the time we were working in wetlands and coastal areas. And so they were in universities, they were in small government shops, they were in consulting shops. How do we incentivize those people to lift that data and make it searchable? Publish it, if you will. And publish it in a way so that it's just not, I made a slippery map, but that I could actually get to the data so I could make a derivative product on it. And that's where the marketplace concept became integral to what we're doing, because we believe that if we could incentivize all of those millions of data producers out there to lift their data up and make it searchable, then that process would create a quote-unquote profit motive for people to not only put the metadata on this data to make it searchable, but actually make new data, make new maps that, in effect, over time, would make the planet a better place to manage, would give the information stream to make it easier to manage. So that was kind of the nascent history of it, and it really came about from the team here wanting to change the world in a way that they knew how, and my own background in finance and economics going, well, commerce is actually a big driver on how to make that happen, and the invisible hand of Adam Smith could actually help that process. That if we got more people involved in making good data and getting paid for making those maps, then the maps get better, people get paid, and it becomes an easier place to manage.
So is this harder than you thought, or is this easier than you thought? Clearly, right?
Oh my! I think that God love those entrepreneurs and their optimistic naivete. If they didn't have those qualifications, nothing would ever get done. Yes, it's certainly, it has been more of a challenge. I think that the technology itself was a challenge. We're talking about very large data sets that in today's even high bandwidth era or higher bandwidth era sometimes bandwidth is still a challenge for moving data sets around. So, the massively parallelized processing and the scalable computers, well, we were an alpha customer on EC2, and we got in there because of our skills at doing time-sharing computing. We were all building supercomputer applications for the DoD, and it became easy for us to look at a similar but commercial available system and say, hey, we could build a business around this. They changed their platform 3 times before they went into an open beta. And so we were tearing down instances and rebuilding them on a regular basis. When it first started, we were regularly losing 30% of our network, and we had to build the management applications around that such that the user never saw that we were losing instances at that kind of rate. It's certainly stabilized to date, and obviously the much greater adoption of Amazon than it was back then. So technically it was certainly a challenge. I think more of a challenge, though, has been the data producers themselves. Publishing a map on the internet's not that hard. And in fact, we ran into that all across the board. Here, let us show you what we can do. And they said, oh, we can stand up a map on the internet. That's easy. And then the first people that were doing it were ArcIMS users.
Yeah.
You remember
it was
ArcIMS?
wonderful. It's wonderful times. I made a lot of money doing that.
Holy smokes! Yeah. Well, and in the first.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, and so there was. There were a number of portals. Esri sponsored a couple, and then there were the government portals that were set up around that. That, it was a challenge. It was a federated indexing service. And so as long as you stood it up and then published the feed to the federated service, and I can't remember, it wasn't Geospatial One Stop.
Geography Network?
Maybe it was Geography Network.
Where it was just pointers to data. You'd register your web service, and then nobody cared whether it was live or anymore, and anybody who used the damn thing would say, here's exactly the data I want, and they click on it, and it says 404.
Right.
And then who do you blame? You blame Esri.
you got to blame somebody. But,
right.
But what it did was it gave a very poor user experience. And so the approach that we took was, look, if we were going to build this service and we were going to build commerce on it, we actually needed to host the data as opposed to point to other services. And after multiple iterations, Esri's finally gotten back to the same sort of structure with ArcGIS.com, is that you really need to host it in order to assure quality of service to the end user. Now, they still, I think, allow pointing of ArcGIS servers as publishing feeds. But we'll talk a little bit about data as a feature here in a bit. The premium content that they share on their network is stuff that they host themselves. The hardest part is that the spatial data business itself is still in the, I want to say, nearly barter phase. Our concept of a spatial marketplace, which I believe will actually win the day, that day may be sometime in the future, build a mall, have lots of stores in the mall where goods can be purchased, the prices are known, you can walk from store to store, find what you want, and in our case, we actually allow you then to, if you take that and put it back together, you get to open your own store. And so it provides all the tracking of revenues and everything back and forth. There is a spatial marketplace, but it just exists as kind of a yellow pages that the customer has to do the walking their fingers through the yellow pages, make some phone calls or do some Google searches and find the phone number. And then they'll find a data vendor that will give them possibly a price depending on some use case and the licensing. And one of the things that we found is that the data vendors are loath to lose that direct contact to the customer. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which You know, they just loathe to
Oh,
lose.
You're not going to say what the reason is?
no, he doesn't want to. I'm
Okay.
gonna hold his. You got to finish up, Paul.
Uh,
That's rule.
Look, so here's digital content. When you make digital content, all of the cost is usually in the upfront cost. Everything else is sales and marketing. That's why software is a 90% gross margin business. You know, all the cost is rolled in at the front, and then they got to spend everything else to try to market it. With data products, typically a lot of data vendors charge the initial customer nearly the full boat to make that product. All the additional revenues are gravy, right? It's 100% margin other than the sales and marketing. And so, number one, they want to see who's out buying that data because they want a chance to sell another primary created product, which is their dominant form of revenue. But second to that is they don't want to lose a sale. And so if they print a price, there's a chance that somebody else will print a price lower than theirs and they've lost the sale. Better to have the contact with that customer so that they can, hey, what do you need it for? Well, here's what I got. And go through that iterative process such that they don't lose the sale. So, and they now have a new relationship, so if that customer would come back for the primary creation of products, which is how they generate their dominant source of revenues, that customer comes back. And so some of what we're trying to do in a spatial marketplace is challenged by the current data business model itself. On the other side of that, and this gets into data as a feature. Data as a feature is a great business model for the companies that are doing it. And let me just put some context around that. And we'll use Esri since most people here understand Esri. But it's fundamentally with most all large software vendors. Oracle just got in the business because they signed a deal with Nokia, right? And they're bringing in Nokia data as a feature to their database services, their database software. But let's start with Esri. Esri has a very large user base, has high lock-in to that user base, and more importantly, wants to keep that lock-in. And well, how do you do that? Well, you offer features to your software. You continue to make that software easier for the customer to use. You go out and talk to your customer. How can I make your life simpler? What are the things I need to do? Where are your pain points? And suddenly they define that some of the pain points are in imagery. I'd like to have imagery on my desktop to use on a regular basis.
Shit's expensive.
It's expensive. If I've got to go call GOI or Digital Globe, but now GOI Digital Globe, they're gonna charge me for that, and I got to go through that iterative process. Well, how much? How big? Send me your shape file, and 3 or 4 days later, I get data.
Yeah.
So Esri goes out and says, well, how about if I bring data to you? Does that solve your? Yes, it solves my problem. So Esri goes to Digital Globe and goes, oi, how much for all your data? Right? I'll write you one check.
All right. It's got 7 figures probably too, right?
It's got a lot of figures, I'm sure. And to the company, it's a great deal, right? To the sales force, they're going, dude, I made my numbers for the year on one deal. Esri, it's a great deal for Esri. Esri now hosts all that data. The users love it because they don't have to go outside. They don't have to try to rip it off from Google, right? You know, I bring in my tiles over here in Google and take a screenshot, and I bring it back in here. So all across the board, it looks like a win-win. And for the price point that I suspect that he got it, a couple bucks a user a year kind of number, right? That's noise in the maintenance fee. So you'd say, well, that's a win-win for everybody. And the great thing for Esri is that it continues to create lock-in for the product. And so they sell more software licenses, which is where their dominant source of revenues is. The challenge that I think for the spatial data industry is every time you write one of those deals, you've just eliminated 1 million customers, right? Or some n number of customers on that platform. Yeah. And they get an all-you-can-eat amount of data for essentially whatever that single check is that you brought in. And so you have taken a whole block of customers that, had you to been able to provide an easy-to-use storefront that was directly integrated with Esri, where the user could just get a sense of it, see it, and then order it. Well, maybe it's 10, 20, 30 bucks a pop, but on average, the money is flowing, and the margins to that product are flowing back to Digital Globe, not necessarily impacting Esri at all. But the data producer does better because they're able to handle the retail demand for the requirements of the data. And so the margins move from data as a feature, I'm creating better lock-in, which that's where the margins are tied up, it's creating better lock-in for Esri, to the data vendor itself, to Digital Globe, because the customer then sees, well, my imagery provider is Digital Globe, and I'm willing to go back there and buy it as I need it. So it gets a bit complicated in that the data as a feature model works for so much of the industry right now, particularly for the premium data vendors, that there's no incentivization unless they could get access to the millions of individual retail customers out there and see that those margins would actually accrete to them. That big check, man, that's hard to pass by. And there's no reason for Esri or any company like Esri not to go out and write that big check, because on a per user basis it's very inexpensive, and anything they can do to create lock-in is good for them. So I think that, you know, the biggest challenge that we've run into has been what the culture of the data vendor market is itself. There's a whole other long tail issue that we were trying to deal with, getting people to push up data and make it professional and turn over that information. But I think that the actual biggest challenge has been around the culture of the data vendor business itself, and the actual successful use case of the data as a feature model. And it's not just Esri. I just picked them because most people here know it. I mean, you can go to IBM, you can go to Accenture, you can go to Pitney Bowes, now Oracle, and all of those companies are signing data deals or bring in data deals that help their customer use the products that they're buying. One other little twist here, and this gets into accounting, and why the salespeople love it. And it's important to keep your sales force happy. Software, you get to book as quota sales in the quarter that you sold it. Data, because it has a use policy, tends to get spread out over the entire length of this enterprise sales deal. So, for instance, I'm an insurance company and I'm buying a 3-year license deal for 1,000 licenses of a GIS product. Okay, that's a big deal. They do, and so the sales guy sits down and goes, "Okay, well, what can I do for you?" Well, yeah, I can toss the data in there for free because we already cut a deal. Remember, we wrote that check last year, and I got all this data for free, so I can toss that in there as a sweetener, as candy, right? It's not actually booked as revenue because I want to see all the revenue booked in software, or most of it anyhow, because the salesperson's incentivized to sell the software. And so the other nuance to the business model is that internal to these large platform companies is that the data itself is not highly valued any more than the check that they wrote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we've got some comments in the IRC that we'd like to bring forth. Let's see. B Flood says Arc to Earth data services for Google data are in ArcGIS, no illegal hack needed. So
The Flood Brothers always bringing legal to GIS.
God love the floods. Actually, I think we were using some of their stuff, or one of our guys was doing some work for us, and he was using some ArcGIS stuff. So there's a shout out for you, Brian.
And earlier on, Chippy Tim said, I have a question. Is open data and sharing sites considered a threat to spatial marketplaces?
I don't think so.
Right, one of our most popular data sets is completely open, OpenStreetMap.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't think it's a threat at all. You know, the marketplace. Again, the marketplace is like a mall, and there are some things in the mall, like the little candy kiosk that you get for free, or you put a quarter in, and then there's Nordstrom's. All things can exist side by side. In fact, there's some. You could argue that it's good to have a mix in there. I got some free stuff, I got some expensive stuff. The most important thing is there's enough stuff in there that when you come, you feel like you can get what you need and move on with the right license, which is a whole other hangout that we'll have, is on licensing and some of the impacts on spatial data marketplaces we can have.
Oh boy. All right, here's a tough one, Paul. Somewhat more going back to data as a service, and he's got a good point here, and I think I can answer this, but I want to see what you say. He says, I think we've talked around the thought of data as a service, like you mentioned, almost like Esri's future services, rather than me hosting the full-blown tele-atlas database to stream the geometry to me. So what he's saying is we all don't need to host the data ourselves. In some scenarios, it makes sense to stream data. But that's a little bit different than what we're talking about. We're talking about data as a feature coming along for free versus companies selling data as a feature as a business model. At least that's the way I take it.
So the streaming of vectors and data as a service, I think data as a service and a spatial data marketplace are nearly synonymous. It's how are you buying it? Are you buying it by the bag that you walk out of the store with, or are you buying it like a cable subscription where you're pulling down the channels that you want when you want to watch it? Where in a spatial data marketplace, I'd say the model is more like Hulu as opposed to maybe a cable provider. But I think that the streaming of vectors is also something that you could put into a data marketplace category. You know, there's a whole other subject here related to what's happening in the advertising business, and Google, and who's probably got the best mapping data in the world right now. They've spent 5, 6, 7, 8 years acquiring content. The acquisition of that content is fundamental to their advertising platform, and so they're subsidizing it, and they've just done a marvelous job. I mean, I can remember comments that people were making when they released their own maps years ago, and you know, it didn't have this road, didn't have that road, but the fact that when they turned it on, they had access to users that were updating the information, and then their own Android platform and iPhone platforms to help them make that better. It's become just a phenomenal data set, and they absolutely refuse to release it other than through their services because it's become such a valuable product to them. So that's another aspect to the data vendor side, and why they're also loath to get involved in a spatial data marketplace, is that when you have something so good, you want people to come to you. Why should I set up a mall when I can set up my own store? But in this case, I doubt that they'll even start selling it because it's such a critical differentiator to their mobile platform. So.
Yeah, I mean, streaming data is a little bit different than selling, you know, clip and ship.
Well, so streaming. Let's separate streaming from streaming of tiles, like a tile cache service,
Yeah.
or some other publishing. So separate streaming from publishing, and that's where I'm making the demarcation. Google publishes a lot of data. If you use Google Earth or Google Maps, you are seeing their published feeds. Now, you can't go in there and actually grab the vertices of the vectors. You can't grab the values, the bit values of the pixels on the screen to do any sort of raster analysis. So they're not streaming the data so much as they're streaming the publishing of the data, which is different from data as a service, as I took the question, which was we're actually going to stream you the vectors you need to do the quantitative analysis and or other renderings that you want to do to create an answer-based product that you're wanting to consume. So I would separate data as a service between publishing and then streaming of the data.
Yeah. So I mean, well, where do you go from? I mean, how do you break out of this cycle, right? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but if there's such incentive to sign these deals with large software vendors to do, just say here's a one-time purchase and everybody who uses that purchase gets it free versus the bigger. I mean, how do you break out of that? I mean, what are you thinking?
I don't know. I mean, it's such a
or does it matter? I mean, is that always going to be around?
So I would argue to data vendors, dude, you got to break out of this, because to data vendors, I would say you want to accrete the margins to yourself. If you sell these data to a customer who's going to give them away for free, the end-use customers, one, already going to have the data they need, but two, the end-use customer is going to value them for free. And so I think the biggest challenge that we have is saying to vendors, there's a better way for you in the future, while at the same time the platforms are writing checks. That's a hard sell. And to the platform vendors, it is a great business model, and you really can't argue with it. So what do you do moving forward? I think you keep just swinging at it. There's different ways. There'll be bobs and weaves through the process. Eventually, I think data and content will win, but eventually could be a lot longer than the naive, optimistic entrepreneur thought originally.
You need a hug?
I need a hug. But I think eventually it will win. We have some special things in this field. In the professional field, the lock-in to software at the enterprise level is so strong. It is so expensive to do a rip and replace on software that if you can just get something a little bit more out of the software vendor for these enterprise purchasers, it's good enough to allow you to stay with the package. And that's why these guys do so well.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I was thinking the moment I saw the Oracle Nokia announcement. I'm like, it's one more way to keep people from ripping out the Oracle and go into open source or Microsoft or IBM.
Now, I think what we will help, and I'm getting a time thing from Madeline. Good job, Madeline.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you'll see, and this gets back into a post that you wrote on the GIS spatial IT, and we can end with this. Right now, in a lot of these enterprise organizations, there's one guy, or maybe a couple of guys, who is the GIS guy. He's the data guru. If you want spatial data, you got to go to him. And he's got his platform. He's got all his tools. He's the guy who goes out and finds the data and brings it in and says, okay, here's your polygon, or here's your answer with respect to spatial data. And the company builds a lot off of that as long as that little piece is working, they don't want to mess with it. And it's usually at such a small cost point relative to the overall product that the enterprise is selling that from a very high level, you're going, why would I mess with something that's costing me only $1 when I'm selling the end product with a lot of other stuff added in for $100? No, don't mess with that. It works. Okay. I think that will change, and it'll change with education, people moving through, and data, spatial data not needing a filter anymore. That the IT stack becomes robust enough to deal with spatial data like any other data field. So a lot of the problems with spatial data marketplaces will also begin to disappear as that GIS bottleneck loses its I don't want to say its importance to the organization, and I see that happening as the IT stack becomes robust enough to handle spatial data just as a matter of course. So, my ending thought on that.
Right, and it segues into next week's talk.
Oh well, there you go.
Careers in GIS. What you need to do to be relevant in today's age of being told you have no future.
No, that's not true. That's not what I said.
I know you
did. I think it's liberating, and here's why it's liberating.
Okay.
GIS shouldn't be synonymous with GIS IT. That spatial knowledge and geography actually is cool. I love it. That's the passion. You know, we've been doing this for as long as we've been doing it. I like looking at the planet every day. The whole goal here is to try to make the place a better place to live. I mean, we're impacting it. Let's make it better in the process of impacting it. The particular route that we took was let's make more data available. Let's incentivize it. Well, that's our route. There's lots of others. If you can separate that ability to analyze spatial data from the ability to manage spatial data in an IT environment, I would argue that would make the GIS or the geography specialist more valuable because they don't have to know about computers and crap anymore, right? They can focus on landscape architecture or planning or whatever else and be good at that because that in and of itself is where they traditionally wanted to be. That's why they went that route. But what happened is the only way we could get to that data and those answers were by becoming IT specialists because the data was so hard to move around. Well, the more that goes away, the more the GIS can be just G, which is geography or geography specialist.
Well, I mean,
I think that's good.
Luke in the IRC just nailed exactly what I've been saying. He goes, becomes a subject matter expert, much like your financial, marketing, et cetera colleagues. You know.
Yes.
And that's exactly the point.
Yes.
You know, instead of, as you say, being, you know, that guy that's doing managing the website, he's managing the database, and all that. Who cares?
Make it an IT function. Make the IT stack robust enough to deal with it, because I want to focus on geography and doing what's required for my organization to better handle the spatial aspects of what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Aw.
Cool. Well, that was great, Paul. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Bye, everybody.
I still have a job, right?
Absolutely. As of this moment, we'll figure out next week.
Oh no. So next week we have 3 people joining us. We've got Kenny Miller from Maryland. Who else we got, Madeline? We've got
David DiBiase from Esri.
From Esri, who is one of these guys. Everybody ends up at Esri at some point. You know,
he was an educator at Penn State for 20 years or so in their GIS program. So
yeah, and so it should be a lot of fun. We've got we'll have 3 people on, those 3 people, and we'll be talking.
And Jessica Touchard, I think. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, from GeoSearch.
Yes, so Jessica will join us. So we have 3 people. We've got somebody in government, we've got somebody in education, and then we've got Jessica, who's going to talk to you know, sort of a professional commercial, but she'll probably talk across the whole thing as being a geo recruiter. So that's our little talk for GIS Day. Should be a lot of fun. I was going to say same time, but it's not the same time because it's now 11 o'clock Mountain Standard. But you guys didn't change.
Same time everywhere else, I guess. So.
See, you people driving. Stay at the same time all year round, and we have no problem.
Only in Arizona.
When I become a dictator, I'll solve a lot of problems.
The world according to James Fee.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be freaking unicorns and rainbows. And,
okay.
No.
Actually, that sounds pretty good. Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Hey, guys.